Hey folks, Chris Mackey here with UT Extension in Unicoi County. Welcome back to the office. Today's topic is going to be probably one of the most important things to think about when selecting the indoor plant that you want to bring into your house. This is part 2, selecting the proper container for your indoor plants. That's right, we're going to be talking about pots. And there's a lot of things to think about when it comes time to selecting the container that's going to be used to house the plants that you're going to have in your home, office, or any indoor location. So sit back, relax, take notes, grab a drink, and let's get to talking about containers. Welcome back, folks. Today we're talking about container selection for your indoor plants. Before we actually start talking the differences, let's go ahead and define what a container is. A container is a vessel that contains your plant's root systems in some sort of potting medium. These containers come in all sorts of shapes, sizes, colors, textures, and what they're actually made of. And so knowing what types are most appropriate for your plant are extremely important. By now you've probably realized and have been listening and understand that the majority of indoor plants need proper drainage. So that's probably the most critical thing when thinking about purchasing your next pot. I've got 3 different containers here that I've purchased for different reasons because they're going to house different types of plants. This green ceramic pot right here that has a really cool color was actually given to me by my grandmother. And it used to have an African violet in it before I accidentally killed it from transplanting because it actually got too big for this thing. But this is actually a self-watering ceramic pot. And the reason she had an African violet in here is because, like we talked about in that first video, African violets don't like water or any kind of precipitation on top of the plant. What will happen is those droplets will land on those leaves and will actually cause that leaf to die off and become discolored. So having some sort of self-watering system for your African violets and other plants that don't like extremely wet soil is extremely important to have. So what happens is you actually have this reservoir here, and I would fill this up probably about halfway, and you can go ahead and put any kind of fertilizer that you have in here as well. What you'll do is you'll take this clay pot that has pores in it, and what will happen is when you place it into the reservoir, that water will penetrate through that clay and will allow the soil and the roots to uptake that moisture that comes through to feed and nourish that plant. And so rather than having a soil texture that is extremely damp and wet, you get a slightly moist mixture at the bottom. So this is a really great pot for those plants that don't like wet feet. Now, on the opposite end, this is another type of self-watering container. And I have water at the bottom. You can kind of hear it. On the bottom, you can see that it actually has a different type of reservoir. And so while the soil doesn't actually make contact with that water that's in the reservoir, what will happen is that water will evaporate upwards. And so this is just another type of container that will allow that moisture to evaporate upwards rather than outwards, because this is a hard plastic, and so the water's not actually going to escape from the container itself like perhaps a terracotta was, or a terracotta or some kind of concrete homemade pot. And so the water will evaporate upwards so that that root system in that plant can use that. Now, this pot actually has a drainage hole at the bottom, you can see. So maybe if you don't want to use the reservoir, take the plug out, and that way that water will expel from the container. And make sure you have a collection basin or some kind of saucer at the bottom. Otherwise, you're going to have a complete mess if you like to overwater. So those are 2 different types of self-watering systems that you can use. Now, the other difference between these two is if I drop both of these, this ceramic one is actually going to break, and it does so pretty easily. Whereas this art stone It's extremely tough and durable. So you're not going to break this thing very easily. So you can have this in areas where maybe you've got children that like to play, or maybe you've got some cats or dogs that are indoors and can get a little, rough sometimes. So the other nice thing about this art stone is that it comes in a lot of different colors and shapes. This is just a simple round one. They have square ones as well. And it is frost proof as well. So this is a great dual purpose container for both indoor and outdoor. Now, I purchased this pot because I just thought it was really cool, the different colors. And that's another thing that to think about when you're actually purchasing your pots, is sometimes the plants that we use all don't have the craziest colors, or they bloom. They're more like succulents or an aloe or something like that. And so having a really nice container can add a lot of character and add a lot of color into your office setting. Now, make sure any type of container that you do have, it has some sort of drainage hole at the bottom, just like this one. And I only paid $2 for this one. So containers can be extremely cheap, but it's really important to think about the size of the container as well. So using, let's say you've got a small plant, you can have a small pot, but let's say that it starts to grow and grows really quickly. Make sure that you're actually transplanting that pot or that plant into a larger pot later on, because if you don't, you're going to cause a lot of damage and a lot of harm to the plant's root system, and they're not going to perform as well and give the size and color and texture like they normally could. So those are just some simple things to think about when purchasing your containers. We mentioned a saucer and collection basin, and there's a lot of different things that you can use. You can have a simple dish that you find in your cabinet, or I paid $1 for this at Walmart. Very cheap, and it actually kind of gives some texture and look to it. What's great about these is maybe you like to overwater every once in a while. What will happen is when you have the plug taken out, that what water is not used or consumed in the soil will actually drain out and will collect in this saucer like this. So maybe you have some of your more tropical plants that need higher humidity. What you can actually do is do false humidity. And so you can water your plant, or better yet, put some water in this collection basin. And then as it evaporates, that humidity, or the water will evaporate and have more humidity around that plant. So if you've got more tropical plants, that's a really great, cheap and easy way to increase your humidity when you're in a more dry or arid place, or maybe your office is really dry. So those are other things to think about as well. So we've talked about having proper drainage, self-watering systems versus non-self-watering systems, having collection basins, increasing the size of the pot as the size of your plant increases. The last thing that you really need to think about is weight of the pot as well. A lot of the plastic containers that we use are very lightweight and extremely hardy. Whereas when you start to use these ceramic containers and clay containers like the terracottas, those actually tend to increase in the amount of weight that they have, particularly as you get into your bigger sizes. So those are one thing to think about. If you've got some indoor plants, some smaller trees of some kind that are going to need 16, 18 plus inches of a pot, depending on what type of container you have, you're going to increase the weight of that plant and that container as well. So make sure you understand that when you have an increase in size, potentially there's an increase in weight as well. So if you've got plants that you're wanting to take indoors outdoors during the summer, and then bring those plants indoors during the winter months, just make sure that you're able to carry those things inside and maneuver and put those plants where they need to be to best perform for you and stay out of the elements. Thanks again for tuning in for this video on picking the proper container for your indoor plants. I hope this video has been informative and that you have a little bit better understanding on the different types of containers for your indoor plants. If you have any questions at all, feel free to contact me. My email is cmackey, M-A-C-K-E-Y, @utk.edu, or call the office. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.